All right, John. Thanks for hanging out with me again.
I always appreciate the invitation. It's kind of weird to be on the receiving end, but there's lots to talk about in chiropractic, so I'm always game.
The receiving end of a podcast invitation?
Correct. Yeah, it feels a little different when you host and facilitate the conversation than when you just chime in.
Yeah, I actually, not to complain to anyone in particular, but I had been on quite a few podcasts a while back, and then it's been a little while. I got invited on an animal chiropractor podcast just recently.
Didn't even know there was such a thing.
Yeah, me neither. And that it's not recorded yet. It's going to be later this month that we're actually going to do that. And I was actually interested in doing it just for the sake of the fact that I was going to pick the brain of the animal chiropractor because I'm curious.
Yeah, that's such a funny thing to me. Like, I have some friends that do that work, and I get it. It's helpful, but I'm like, man, it's all the suffering people that are making the world worse. Like the cows and the chickens and the horses and the dogs, they'll be okay.
I'm curious how the business model works. So I'm interested in how much do you charge? Where do you get your clients? Are you working on a bunch of different animals in the same place? Are you going to like the racetrack and like adjusting a bunch of horses? Like what? I'm just kind of curious how the business model works because it's different than what you and I would be used to.
I have a friend here, and this is like not the topic of the conversation, folks, but she only works on like AKC show dogs. Her whole practice is canine, and they have a really convoluted route in Colorado. They have to go through a vet referral. So I think it's a state by state kind of a thing. And not everybody does follow the rules on that. But for the ones that have the diplomate training and are really, qualified in there, there's a few different avenues. But I have some friends that work on horses and they charge way more than they would charge for a person.
Yeah. It's not, there's no possible way it's the same financial structure. Because who's seeing 35 horses in a day? You know what I mean? Like that can't possibly be the case.
Yeah.
Have you, well, maybe you don't want to admit to this because you're still in practice. I have adjusted an animal before. The funny thing was, and maybe this takes us into the chiropractic philosophy conversation, but I had a cat that was sneezing. It just started sneezing constantly. And I had this thought in my brain because it's like, it's like chiropractic because I don't believe it's just musculoskeletal. So I was kind of like, I'd heard people talk about adjusting animals and whatever. And I was like, listen, even if I kill this thing, I'm fine. Like, I don't care what happens. I just needed to stop sneezing. And so I got an activator and adjusted this cat's neck with an activator and it stopped sneezing. And
it's like, I will do whatever I have to for you to never do that to me again.
Yeah, listen, and if you die, you die. That's just the way it is, and I adjusted the cat 2 separate times and both times for the same reason. It had started sneezing, it would go around the house and sneezing. And I activated its neck, that's the word I'm going to use. Uh-huh. And and my other thought was, I don't even know if this thing does anything. So
yeah. Well, for all you people that have pets with seasonal allergies, I think we just unlocked a new niche. Yes. So Rocket Chiro will build you a website for that. The SEO should be easy, right?
Yeah, it can't possibly be hard. I mean, in the landscape of SEO where less competition makes the job easier, that has got to be an easy ranking thing.
I have been asked on a handful of occasions to check a dog, and I've always said no.
Do you know, I'm going to name names. Do you know Dr. Bruce White out of Kentucky, upper cervical guy?
I don't.
Okay, so he was one of the knee chest KCUCS guys years ago, and I'm sure he doesn't listen to my podcast, but if he does, great guy. We went on a mission trip together, like such an awesome dude. And he actually had a video. It was essentially a video testimonial. And he's out in the middle of Kentucky. Like, it's like people bring, they talk about their dogs and whatever. And this family that he took care of had this dog that would drag its legs around, and it had like a little doggy wheelchair, and it would drag its little legs around. And they asked him, like, do you think you could adjust the dog? And he was like, bring it in the back, like that sort of thing. And he's got a video of before and after of this dog's like dragging its legs around the office, and he adjusted this dog's neck. Now he did not, there's no video of the adjustment. So it's like, it's all hearsay. But then the post thing was the dog's like going around the office like normal.
Well, the KCCS guys would still want to know, but what the scan do, right?
Yeah,
Did
exactly.
you clear the scan? and shout out to at Chiropractic if he's listening. Just get the mental image of doing a leg check on a dog. No, you're a big fan of leg checks.
Leg checks and yeah, I don't
It's all
know.
out there, you know, and like in our field, it's so funny how we like to apply principles, you know, and we have such big ideas about things, which is the topic of the conversation, that we're always looking for an angle to apply our concepts, you know, and, you know, that is proof that when you make a change to the neuromusculoskeletal system purposefully, and you can see function improve, and it's not all just a placebo effect or a specific impact. There can be real systemic impacts. And that's the folks that, you know, do work on the horses and the dogs and things. Like, they'll tell you plenty of stories about, you know, horses that were had a funky gait, you know, that were more or less lame, that improved their demeanor. They weren't mean. They weren't biting at people. I mean, it's cool, but just never got me interested.
You know what I think is there's like this big kind of push and movement within like the evidence-based chiropractic kind of niche, or, you know, what people call mixers or metapractors, and you'll hear kind of like different words to kind of describe chiropractors that are really purely musculoskeletal and to really get away from anything chiropractic philosophy. And there's this push to kind of just run away from anything that's not like double-blind tested. And as much as I am not, like, I used to be deep into chiropractic philosophy, and as much as I'm not in that camp, I'm very much a moderate. I would strongly argue against anyone who believes that chiropractic is exclusively musculoskeletal. I think you have to be living under a rock. You have to be ignoring whatever. And if you're going to say it's all placebo too, that's not the case either, because there are chiropractors who don't ever discuss anything besides musculoskeletal, who have patients that come in and are like, would this affect my digestion? Would this affect my sleep? Would this affect my whatever? And it has nothing to do with musculoskeletal. And it's not like they told them that was going to happen. So whether it's an animal, it wasn't really my play into this conversation, but it fits. But whether it's an animal improving that has obviously no, you know, what you say to them is not going to matter, or it's a human being, there's an element to chiropractic that's not musculoskeletal. The thing that I don't necessarily know is, how much does philosophy play into what chiropractors do? How much is it necessary? How much does it affect what a patient experiences? Like, I just don't know that. And that was kind of why I wanted to have you come on, is to kind of have a conversation about chiropractic philosophy. And I guess a good starting point would be, where are you at on chiropractic philosophy, and in terms of like your personal view of it, and then maybe how it plays out in your practice?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, because it has everything to do with where you went to school. You know, we have this idea that chiropractic philosophy is supposed to be this like unifying force, that we all have a common set of definitions and, you know, terminology, but it's really always kind of been divisive. But as far as where I fall, I think it's interesting that a lot of folks who don't have much experience with it completely write it off, you know, without having examined it, which I think is kind of an ironic thing to come from, let's say, an evidence-based mindset. Is like, well, let's appraise the evidence. Let's look at it for itself. Yeah. I find value in it in terms of some of the interesting thoughts on the nature of health and healing. You know, I don't think that it informs me as to what I do so much, because regardless of what you believe about what we're doing, an adjustment is a musculoskeletal input. You know, it is integrated in the nervous system, and like, we know all about what happens physiologically in known measurable terms. at least up to date, there's impacts there. We understand what those things are. But I do think it's become kind of for a lot of chiropractors, there's like this bumper sticker philosophy, which I would sort of put beside like real chiropractic philosophy. So, I've read more green books than the average upper cervical doc, and I've read Strauss and ACP papers and Reggie Gold and listened to Kale lectures. Like, I've got into it because for me, it seems like it's always been such a polarizing and emotional topic. I wanted to get a good grasp on it and decide for myself, like, what's the story here? So, obviously it's, I should put it this way. Every time I've gotten stuck in practice with a patient, I've found that it's not usually the philosophy that helps me break through, it's science. Philosophy might give me a foundation for who am I as a chiropractor? What am I attempting to facilitate in the body? What are the reasons for the choices that I would make therapeutically, to use a word that would, rub some philosophical chiropractors the wrong way. But I don't look at it as a way to excuse myself of the science and art of chiropractic. It's not something that we can just treat people haphazardly and, with our philosophical fervor, assume a lot of things about what's going to happen in the patient's life. So for me, like, I find value in it. I've kind of put it on the shelf for a while, and I've been more focused on the science, but I do keep coming back to this idea that it's a really important concept to view the body as self-regulating and to view health as a process of normal function, and to view the work that we do as chiropractors in an effort to facilitate normal function and to enhance the body's natural recuperative capabilities. That's a really powerful differentiator between how you may help someone through care and the reasons why you make the choices that you do, to adjust, to not adjust, to refer, to not refer, to, you know what I'm saying? And so I think for me, I occupy this middle ground, sort of like you, where the way I talk about certain things, the like real hardcore philosophical types would call me, maybe like metapractic in my language, because I'm not afraid to use the word treatment. I'm not afraid to talk to people about their symptoms. Yeah. But on the evidence-based side, I appreciate that, like you said, when we're dealing with the human body and we're dealing with people, there are infinite variables that are not measurable, in terms of what influences the outcome. And so I hope that answers your question. But for me, it's definitely foundational. It's part of how I got into the style of practice that I have, which is an upper cervical chiropractor. But I have found limitations in my ability to progress with my skills, relying solely on philosophy to get me there.
I think that the idea, because I was thinking about this kind of in preparation to have this conversation, and I was thinking about the thing that we can all agree on, or we should all agree on, is that the body can heal itself. And this is not a uniquely chiropractic idea. Correct. This is a nutrition idea. This is an exercise idea. This is even within the medical profession, they know full well, if you really break it down, we're going to give you medicine, we're going to do a surgery, but if the body doesn't participate in this process, you're not going to get better. Yeah. So regardless of what you're doing from a treatment standpoint or intervention standpoint or whatever, we are all relying on the body's ability to heal itself. Even if you do nothing, you're relying on the body's ability to heal itself.
Correct.
And when it stops doing that, and when it doesn't do it well, that is where you get sick. That is where you die. And that is where ultimately your body you could have the exact same experience. You could be exposed to the exact same thing. You could have the exact same set of circumstances as somebody else in your family, somebody else in your town, somebody else in your church, and you can have a different outcome because how your body adapts or doesn't adapt to that thing. So that is not a uniquely chiropractic thing. And so anybody who tries to remove that element from chiropractic and what we are doing is just being ridiculous. Like you are saying you're evidence-based, and you're just removing anything beyond that has to do with a muscle or a joint from what you're doing, which I think is just ridiculous, because even a physical therapist that is purely musculoskeletal is still relying on the body's ability to heal itself.
Yeah. and everything affects the nervous system, right? We act like chiropractic adjustments are the only thing that enhance the function of the nervous system. But listening to this conversation as a nervous system input, eating a bagel is a nervous system. Like everything affects the nervous system. Every provider that interacts with our patients has an impact on the nervous system. We endeavor to do it on purpose, and do it for specific reasons. But that's where I think, when I was really getting into philosophy, I kind of gravitated towards a Reggie Gold type of model. And I think he screwed the pooch in a lot of ways on this. But the idea that like vitalism is a philosophy, chiropractic philosophy falls in line with vitalism, but it is not uniquely chiropractic, right? So when other, people have ideas about health and healing, right? It's like the people that are, selling Juice Plus, right? They'll tell you like, oh, this is natural. It's things natural, right? It enhances your body's natural healing. And we would go, well, that's not the same as an adjustment. So the Reggie Gold kind of a camp was, what they called the subjective straight movement, which is, a subluxation in a patient is like reason enough for chiropractic, and it's not related to the conditions, and it's not related to the, the funky ideas about like natural health that came up in the hippie movement and influenced chiropractic. It is a uniquely chiropractic thing from chiropractic sources with chiropractic operational definitions. Now, where I think that got a little bit off the rails is it provided folks an excuse to not be accountable to science, to just go, well, I'm just a straight chiropractor. I just adjust people. I don't know what your diseases are. I don't know what your symptoms are. I'm not responsible for any of that. It removed some of the doctoring, which, if people have an idea that we shouldn't be doctors and we should be more like that, it's just not the reality anymore. So we've got to get over that idea that, when you're entrusted with the health of a fellow person, and we are licensed as, primary care doctors, like I don't love that, but it is a responsibility, and we can't use philosophy or our personal beliefs about chiropractic as an excuse to fall short of our responsibilities to the patient. And that's where I agree with some of the evidence-based chiropractors, where they look at, quote, philosophical chiropractors and go, I just don't like what you're saying, and I don't like the style of business you have. And so that means chiropractic philosophy is whack. And it's like, well, maybe so. Or also, maybe that's not a good reflection of philosophy and practice.
Yeah, I think that being philosophical doesn't give you the right to be incompetent. And that's where you have people that they want to put blinders on to their responsibility. I think of, like, I would never have considered myself on any level a diagnostician, can't even say the word, but someone who would be an expert at diagnosing all these different issues. But I did know, I always considered my job as the job of recognizing, oh, craps. Like, for sure. My job is to, if I see something on a film, if I see something in an exam, or see something in a regular visit where somebody comes in and I go, that's not good. This is not a chiropractic thing. This is not an adjust it and see how it goes thing. This is a something else needs to be done thing. It is my responsibility to identify those things and do the appropriate thing for the patient, and not just say, well, we're going to turn your power on and, you're going to, the body can heal itself. It's so strange to me to have this approach of the body needs no help, just no interference, but it needs to be adjusted every week.
Yeah.
It's like,
that's not congruent thought.
I can't figure out how that is not being intellectually dishonest. It's like, what are we even saying when we say that? And it's such a strange thing. So I think that you and I are both in agreement in terms of, like, there needs to be a base level of competence for chiropractors for the position they're in, the responsibility that the patients are putting on. Because listen, whether you like it or not, the patients are looking to you as an authority figure, and they're looking to you to give them good advice. And if they come to you and, I had a patient that I remember, like, she came to me and kind of jokingly said some comment about, like, oh, just ignore the fact that her one leg was completely swollen up and the other one looked perfectly normal. And she was just embarrassed. She was very proper, older woman, always very well dressed, always did her hair. And she was embarrassed about how it looked. And so she was like, oh, just ignore that. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I was like, did you do something about it? No. I was like, no, now, like, go now. And I was concerned about her having a clot. I was concerned about her having something very serious going on. And it turned out she did. And she was like very thankful for me that I took that very seriously. This is not a adjust you, clear out your scan, go home, drink some water, and you'll be fine because your innate has this. Like, that's not what this situation is. And if I treat it that way, I'm being irresponsible, even though I firmly believe in her body's ability to heal itself.
Yeah. Well, and I think about this, like, the patient-centered approach to chiropractic has less to do with what you believe and more to do with what's in the best interest of your patient, right? So, like, I think of chiropractic philosophy as for chiropractors, not for the general public. Like, it was written by chiropractors for chiropractors to give us a sort of foundational understanding of what we're doing, right? It's not a ideology that we're trying to push on the masses to convert them into our worldview.
But you and I aren't, but chiropractors are. And that's the thing that I don't understand. I don't understand why it's necessary. And maybe you don't understand either. I don't understand why it's necessary that patients see chiropractic the exact same way that I do, regardless of how that is. I don't understand that.
I have an idea about that. I think there's a couple things. I think number one, chiropractors, and this is a generalization, but in general, I think some chiropractors are insecure and they want to be validated by people agreeing with their points of view. The second thing is a lot of philosophical chiropractors I've noticed have held on to this us versus them, chiropractic versus medicine sort of ideology. And if we're not convincing them of our approach, that means that we are sacrificing them to the medical system. It's like this back and forth between, like, warring ideologies. Like, it's a moral battle between the lives of our patients, right? Do they buy into a vitalistic chiropractic worldview, hook, line, and sinker, or do they fall prey to big pharma, right? And it's like, I just don't see that being the case in the real world. And it's really not our patients' responsibility to deal with our professional baggage, right? So I think there's a lot of that goes on. The irony and hypocrisy of some of this, which really, like, aggravates me, is that sometimes the people that talk the biggest game about chiropractic are the ones that are inadvertently positioning chiropractic as a treatment for everything under the sun, right? So you're in the marketing space and you realize that, like, if you tell a patient that upper cervical adjusting helps with vertigo, what you're implying to them is all these other things that contribute to vertigo, that's not it. It's just come get your atlas adjusted and it will, in some cases, that's true. But now you have positioned chiropractic as a treatment for that medical condition, which you have said all along was not the point of chiropractic. So when we start to, like, be very hypocritical with our use of some of these terms and we use them inappropriately, it, number one, demeans the value of chiropractic philosophy. It creates red flags in the mind of the general public because they're seeing mixed messages about what are we doing here, right? And in the world of internet access, and we can share our message widely, there's a lot of opportunity for that. And I think it always comes from a good place, but it does position things a little bit weird. And I've had lots of patients that have come in from some of these social media strategies that other chiropractors use, and they find me as an upper cervical guy, and they have medical conditions that are driving their symptomatology. But this quick clip made it sound like, well, it's just a simple adjustment. All this pain and suffering, it's just a simple adjustment away. And so it does put us in a position where, that diagnostic part of us that we don't love, and like you were alluding to, it's like, if that's not done well, this person's going to have a terrible experience with upper cervical, because either one of two things has to happen. Either one, you're going to treat them, they're not going to get better, and they're going to see upper cervical as a failure, or you're going to have to admit that you lied to them about what it is that you have to offer. Either way, it's a net loss. And so I would just advocate for folks, if you feel that you're philosophical and what you do is like remove interference, talk about that, right? Like put content out, like pump up chiropractic, like share those ideas, share the science related to it. But a lot of times it's not emphasized. And so, those of us that, maybe take a little bit more of a scientific approach to the conditions, get criticized as losing our philosophical grounding. And I see that as a complement to my philosophical understanding of chiropractic is my understanding of the science of the things that I work on, in my case, the upper cervical spine. And I'm making sure that I can blend these different tenets of chiropractic, this philosophy, science, and art, make sure that each of them is in context, is applied properly, and that we don't overemphasize any one thing and try to make it the only thing. And so when you survey the landscape of some of the conversations, and that's the kind of stuff that I feel like, man, we do have a really interesting message. Like chiropractic as a set of tenets related to health and healing has some very interesting and potentially powerful ideas, for the average person. And whether or not they get it verbatim, like an adjustment unifies intelligence, force, and matter, right? But if we do help them understand that, when we adjust you, it actually enhances the function of your body. It allows things to work better. The natural byproduct, you feel better because things are working better, right? Not because we dumb down your symptoms, but because we enhanced function. You can keep it at that level. But a lot of it gets really weird when you get into the space of like, we're communicating it outwardly again. And that's where it becomes up for interpretation, by the listener. So I'm kind of a firm conviction that chiropractic philosophy is for chiropractors and less for the rest of the world. But I know folks will disagree with me on that.
You know what? I found myself being exhausted by like what you were talking about, not because of how you were saying it, but because you had mentioned like me being in the marketing space. And one of the things in the marketing space is you have to figure out how do you communicate value in as short a time and as simply as possible so that someone gets it right away. And I thought to myself, like, as you kind of you said a couple of things and I was putting things together in my brain and I was going, what's so frustrating about the non-musculoskeletal benefits of chiropractic is that the verbal gymnastics that we go through to try to explain what we're doing, where it's not disease, it's dis-ease, and it's not, we're not treating, but we're treating. Like we're not, we're just helping. And it's like, there's no straightforward message that has existed up to this point in a philosophical space that makes any sense to the average person. Because when we say what we say, they don't hear what we say. Like patients hear, you're treating asthma, you're treating bedwetting, you're treating headaches, migraines, vertigo, Meniere's, whatever it is, emotional issues, sleep problems, blood pressure, whatever could possibly get better from a chiropractic adjustment. They do not hear that what we are doing is getting the body to function better. And as a result of that, the body heals itself and some of these things go away. That's not what they hear. They hear, you think you can cure everything. And then you have to spend hours and hours explaining that's not what you do. And when you get done, you haven't done a good job of that. They just hear that chiropractors think they can cure everything. And it's like the double-edged sword, because it's the chiropractors who are seeing the broadest variety of symptoms are the ones who will claim that they aren't treating any of them. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's confusing to people. And
well, here's my thing with those people. So take down all your video testimonials of conditions that resolved, right? Take down all your Google reviews saying he fixed my neck pain. Take down all of your posters on the wall that said, 9 years of chronic pain resolved. If that's not your intention, then again, quit making it the point to make, which is like, we can do all this stuff. Look what chiropractic can do. And so I'm just like, I really bristle at hypocrisy. And I'm sure that's kind of in the eye of the beholder. But as a consumer, and when I see someone sharing a message that seems all-encompassing and seems too good to be true and seems very idealistic and seems very vague and sort of like hard to nail down, that creates withdrawal, right? Yeah. And in a profession that claims that we have a philosophy of inside out, we like to blame all of our problems on everybody else, right? Outside of chiropractic, instead of going, you know what? If for the last 50 years, 8% of people have been under chiropractic care, no matter how many blogs and dinners with the docs and, YouTube videos and all this crap, we're still seeing the same amount of people. An inside out view of that would say, man, maybe we should update our language, or maybe we should make a change to the way that we're presenting ourselves to the world, to access those extra people. Let's not blame it on the medical system. Like, I'm sorry, medical doctors are not trying to suppress their patients from going to the chiropractor. That hasn't happened for 60 years, right? What medical doctors want to see is that you're not weird, that you're using decent practices, and that you get relatively okay results, right? Like, you can be trustworthy in the marketplace, and you don't have to play this game of we've got something for everyone, right? Because this in business, like, if you have something for everyone, you kind of really have something for nobody.
You have nothing for nobody. So you were talking about at Chiropractic, which is the Instagram handle, and he posted a video the other day that was like, it said something like, when someone tells me they feel good after one adjustment, and it's like this person that's like flying away, like the he's basically like, I am God flying away sort of thing. And a chiropractor made a comment underneath it there. I would just tell them that chiropractic is not just about symptoms. It is about function. And it's like, shut up. It's like, why do you have to say such stupid things?
Well, let's just not adopt a lingo, like, oh, we're in this tribe of like pediatric vitalistic chiropractors, so we just say all the cliches, right? Like, think about it. That's the thing. Like, read the books, study the philosophy, mull it over, like, kind of work on the problems in your head and develop your own way of discussing this stuff with people. I get really irritated with those like cliches that you get thrown around, because it's like, what are you even saying? Like, do you even think about what that means and like the way it could be interpreted? I hate cliches, and there's so much of that in the quote philosophical chiropractic world.
There's two issues. There's two issues with this, and this is an analogy I've used for a long time. There's two issues. One issue is that when someone tells you my back feels better, and you say it's not about pain, it's about function, you're disregarding that person's experience. So you are, whether you think you are or not, you're crapping on that person's experience, and instead of acknowledging kind of what they're going through, what they're saying, and kind of keeping it in the realm of their conversation. And you do this with new patients too. When somebody comes in and they say, I have a headache, I want to get adjusted, and you're like, do a Jedi mind trick where you're just like, you don't really want your headaches relieved. You want your innate flowing at 100% and your subluxations removed. And it's like, you're just disregarding the person. So just, first of all, understand from a human communication standpoint, that's what you're doing. But the analogy that I've used for years is, imagine a gym owner that stood outside of his gym and would only let members come in if they understood that exercise was for improving your health and helping you reach your fullest health potential. And you would go in, you said, I want a gym membership. And what are you here for? Well, I'm here because I got a wedding coming up and I want to look sexy in a dress. Well, let's sit down and talk about you reaching your fullest health potential, because that's really what exercise is for. Exercise is really not just about getting into a dress and looking sexy for your wedding. Exercise is about being healthy and getting off drugs and letting your body function at 100%. And then the guy comes in and he says, I want to be all muscly and strong and look sexy for this, whatever. Let's sit down and talk about reaching your fullest health potential. That gym owner would be a freaking moron, because there's all kinds of reasons why people go to the gym. Some of them are noble. Some of them are not. Some of them are function. Some of them are health. Some of them are just because. Some of them because people want to look good. Some of them are shallow. But the people that are in there exercising are not like, it's not like, oh, you're not getting the health benefits because you're here for the sexy dress. Like, you're only getting the sexy dress benefits. That's not how chiropractic works. And when people go into evidence-based chiropractors and they get adjusted and they're sleeping better and they're taking less medication and their digestion's better, they might not even put those two things together. But it's not like they only got the musculoskeletal benefits from the adjustment.
Right. 100%. And I think the philosophical, if you really want to if you really want to take this approach in chiropractic, like you have to be the most humble, because that means you don't get to take credit for any of your results, right? Like if you really believe that a patient's health recovering under chiropractic care is because of the natural healing capabilities of the body, then you by default have to put yourself second. And it's not about how amazing you are, what technique you do, what, kind of camp you don't have to prove chiropractic to everybody.
And you should be trying not to adjust them.
Correct.
Like that's the other thing that upper cervical chiropractors get right and other chiropractors don't. And that is upper cervical chiropractors are trying to get you to go longer without needing an adjustment. They're the only philosophical chiropractors who do that, to my knowledge. Now the evidence-based ones do, because they don't believe in anything other than, hey, if it hurts, come in. You know what I mean? If it's not hurting, don't come in. But upper cervical chiropractors can be very philosophical in their approach and still say, I'm trying to get you to go months, a year. I want you to not need the adjustment, because that lines up correctly with the idea that the body doesn't need help. It needs no interference. And so if you're going to say like your body doesn't need medication and your body doesn't need this and your body doesn't need that, your body shouldn't need to get adjusted every week either. And when you don't line up your chiropractic philosophy in practice, like practically what you're doing with what you're saying, you're being a hypocrite. This is the stuff that drives me crazy.
And it's no wonder that people will not adopt your view, right? And that was something that actually, as a patient, drove me to upper cervical in the first place. Was I was studying and learning philosophy and going like, okay, I get it, like adjusting, interference, the whole point. Okay, so why do I need adjusted in 5 places 3 times a week? Like, am I ever free of nerve interference, right? Like, This was my thought. I'm like, is this all for nothing? But the upper cervical people were like, no, you know what? Like, that's actually the objective. Being in adjustment, like not needing to be adjusted is better than being adjusted. But we're so obsessed with the adjustment in philosophical chiropractic that we just want to apply it all the time. And I've always felt like you do that way, which is like, that's actually not a very philosophically congruent model. Is like, you need to have your spine adjusted endlessly because it's not really empowering the patient to achieve the full benefits of the philosophy. So in my opinion, I would rather have my patients, to your point, get the benefits of chiropractic philosophy, whether they know it or not. And I can smile to myself and go, nice, but they don't need to beat them up with all of these ideas about, how the such and such nerve goes to this organ and do all the stuff, right? It's like the science will allow me to filter my experiences as a chiropractor through these philosophical ideas, apply a thoughtful adjustment in a patient's situation to try to get them the benefits that the philosophy offers, right? It's not like we'll just kind of wing it and just, keep pounding on the philosophy and hope it all works out. And it's kind of funny how historically, a lot of these big philosophical movements are like, I don't want to say pseudo-religious, but almost, because there's usually a powerful figure, right? Some super charismatic guy. You got Sid Williams,
I got something I'm gonna share with you. Yeah.
Right. So you get all of these really powerful leaders who are really convicted in this belief, and they develop a following, and it's almost like a cult-like following, right? And so when you see like these philosophical movements over time, I always look back and go like, man, there was a pseudo-religious, like cult-like adherence to some of these ideas, and I think it, to our point, propagates some of this, like, I'm just adopting these beliefs because I'm compelled to by someone who is an authority in this space, and it really resonates with me. So like, I'm just going along with it.
Yeah. So I got something I'm going to share with you. I was planning on sharing this with you anyway, but you freaking put it on the tee, and I'm going to knock it out of the park. So one of the things I started doing, and I don't know, maybe you do this already anyway, but one of the things I started doing recently when I have somebody on the podcast and I know I'm going to talk about a particular subject is I'll go on ChatGPT and I'll just say, this is what we're going to talk about. This. What are some things to consider? What are some interesting questions? And I end up going down this rabbit trail because it just sort of gets my brain in the right space. And so I was typing in stuff about like, what is the role of chiropractic philosophy? How does it impact patients? What are some things you should consider? And so I typed in this question: in what way does chiropractic philosophy mimic a religion? Yeah. So I love the answer, and I was going to share this with you anyway. So it has some key points here. So one point is faith in an unseen force, so innate intelligence, sacred texts, so your green books and, that sort of thing. Divisions and denominations, which is doctrinal differences, vitalistic versus mechanicalistic, mixers and straights, that sort of thing. Rituals and repeating practices. So this has to do with adjusting by philosophical adjustments. So we talked about that, where it's like you're getting adjusted every week because it's good for your innate and that sort of thing. Evangelism and conversion. This is not only chiropractors, but people like patients. We have to convert, right? Persecution and martyrdom. We've already talked about this stuff, but I love that this was like the way that this was written.
Yeah.
And then at the end, it just kind of talks about like, is chiropractic going to go kind of follow that more religious kind of path, or is it going to follow the science and kind of whatever? I love those points because those points marry so well with where we are as chiropractors. And I think the people that are the most egregious about this are the ones who are still saying to themselves, when a patient comes in with headaches, what do I do? And to me and you, that's like, what a dumb question. But there are genuinely people. Now, listen, if you're old, you've been doing this forever, you're not even listening to this podcast anyway, because the people who are most likely listening to this podcast are a younger demographic. They're younger, they're getting started, they're in their first, 5, maybe 10 years of practice. But I mean, we don't have 30-year veterans listening to this podcast, most likely. And so you young guys that you graduated after me, you graduated after John, and it's like, and you're listening to this, if you're saying to yourself, like, I'm not sure if I can accept a patient who just wants to come in for back pain or just wants to come in for neck pain. And I'm not, how much do they have to understand? Do they have to get the big idea? I want to unburden you with that.
Thank you.
For God's sake, that is unnecessary. You can have your philosophy. That's great. That's wonderful. That's fine. Dig in deep and let it motivate you to do the best you can and help this person the best you can. And I'll tell you where I think philosophy can be a wonderful help to a practice style. And that is what philosophy will do is it will open you up to accepting patients that an evidence-based chiropractor wouldn't. And I'm not saying that you should
potential in people.
Yes, I'm not saying that you should accept them under false pretenses.
Correct.
Because this is I'll tell you my approach. You may have a different approach. I'll tell you my approach. If somebody came to me and it was a just off the wall thing, and I'll give you an example. I had a lady that came to me. She met me at the YMCA. Her grandson was in her custody. She was raising her grandson, and he was not only wetting the bed, but he was peeing himself. Like that thing that you and I take for granted that your body tells you it's time to pee. He didn't get that. He just would look down and be like, "Ah, crap, I peed." And she asked me, she said, I've heard chiropractic can maybe help bedwetting. Is this something that you ever, and I was like, this is super weird. And we talked about it a little bit. It turns out she had custody of him because his father was abusive. His father used to take his head and slam it up against the wall. And she said that he used to be fine when he was younger. At this point, he's like 10 years old. He's being homeschooled because he can't go to school this way because kids make fun of him. And it was a terrible situation. But what I heard was this, is like, I said, have you gone to the doctor? Yes. Have they looked into everything? Yes. Have you gone to a neurologist? Yes. She's gone to everything. She's just done. She has she's not sure where to go, what to do. He has a history of trauma. He wasn't this way before his dad slammed his head against the wall. Now he is this way now. Now, could it have to do with PTSD or something? Sure. It could be an emotional issue, has nothing to do with structure. But I said, let me take a look at him. And if there's something that I feel like needs to be adjusted, something I can do, because if I can't find something that I need to work on, I'm not going to do it. Bring him in. Let me look at him. So I looked at him, did some x-rays, did some exams. I was like, yeah, I could adjust this kid. Adjusted him one time, nothing happened. Adjusted him the second time. Now his grandma, or he used to carry around a timer, and this timer just went off every 45 minutes, and he would go into the bathroom and stand there and see if he had to pee. This is his solution. This is not a good way to live.
No.
I adjusted him. I laid him down. We used to rest patients after they adjusted. And he says, hey, Dr. Jerry, can I go use the bathroom? Because he's a real polite little kid. And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. So he gets up, he goes to the bathroom. I go into the waiting room where his grandma's at. And I said, does he have his timer? And she said, no. And she lifted it up, showed it to me. It's like, So he comes back in, lays down, and I stuck my head over the little half wall. And I said, did you feel that? And he said, yeah. I said, it's a good day, isn't it? And he said, yeah. And he was good after that. Now, listen, do I know the mechanism? No. Do I know the nerves? No. Would I go around telling everybody I cure bladders and whatever? Is it a coincidence? Maybe. All I know is that they had absolutely no help. No help, no hope. And if I was only musculoskeletal, if that's all I believed in, and I didn't think that the adjustment had any power to do anything else, I would have never accepted him as a patient. And perhaps that still is an issue. I don't know. So I believe that philosophically, it opens you up to help people. But I also believe it is your responsibility to make sure that they have done everything reasonable and that you are being honest, you are being fair about what the potential is, and that you are not going into it saying, like, misleading them in any way. And you should be very, very careful when doing it. But I do think that those things do happen. And I do think that being philosophical opens up the door to help people that wouldn't get help anywhere else. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about chiropractic.
100%. And it's also freeing for you as a provider to say, you know what, I don't have to try to have a, step-by-step mechanism for this. Like I see your suffering. I know that some of what we can help you with is measurable, and has not been looked at. Let's just see what we can find. Do you have something? Yeah. And then you say, you know what? Let's give it a go. Right. And you can, with open lines of communication and informed consent and good scientific chiropractic, you can be open to, and I always have in the back of my mind, even if I don't think it's likely, I always think it's possible, right? Like, because we don't really know, right? Not everything boils down to finite mechanisms of neural pathways and research backed and validated mechanisms, because research is always evolving.
That's the thing.
Yes.
And if they know that, they've tried other stuff, they're running out of options, or maybe they're just very conservative. Like they're just like, hey, I don't like to take medicine, or my body's sensitive to medicine, or I just don't want to do a surgery, and I'm willing to try anything, even if it's a Hail Mary. Like, I'm perfectly fine taking someone like that, and I'm not gonna sign them up for a year's worth of care. I'm gonna say, like, listen, let's give it a few weeks, let's give it a month, let's see what happens, see if there's seems to be any sort of connection with what you're feeling, what you're going through, and what we're doing. If there doesn't, we'll pull the plug. But if it does, like, then we'll talk about, like, how far do we take this, and how do we go about this? I'm fine with that. And I've had so many stories, and when I was in practice, of crazy things that happen under those circumstances. But I don't want somebody showing up where it's like, this is I'll give you an example of a guy. He shows up, and his aunt was a patient of mine, and he's like, yeah, she had a rib thing that you helped her with, and it's like her side was hurting and kind of whatever, which is a musculoskeletal thing. But he shows up. This guy had fallen. He walked around with like crutches, and he fell on the crutch, and he had dislocated a rib. Like, I don't know how it didn't break, but it was you could palpate that the rib head was over the top of the other one. It would have completely dislocated. I don't know how he was even not like having more pain than he was. He's like, yeah, it just hurts right back here. I was like, bro, you're in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And sometimes people just show up, and it's like, this is not the place. This is not the time when you have some bizarre thing going on. Like, I'm not the first stop. Maybe the first stop is the neurologist, and maybe they don't have an answer. But there's a logical path of healthcare professionals to go to that makes sense. And if you always think that you're the answer, and you're the one, and I'm the starting point for everything, and I don't know, I just think
of cause.
I think chiropractors are like, you can be philosophical, and that leads you to be irresponsible and incompetent with how you're handling patients, and that bothers me tremendously.
But to your point, an understanding of chiropractic philosophy will give you something to consider in light of those circumstances, right? Because you're going to be looking for opportunities for folks to improve in ways that they don't expect chiropractic to help them with. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you can guarantee them that it will. But this is where, as a chiropractor with a philosophical foundation, when I'm going through a history with folks and I'm asking about a lot of things related to health over a long period of time, I'm trying to understand like what's possible here, right? Like on the musculoskeletal side, it's pretty predictable. We have a decent idea of how that'll play out. And we know in science that there are motor, sensory, and autonomic consequences for having a spine that's dysfunctional persistently over time, right? Yeah. And so if we can then theoretically improve on the function of the spine and we can see improvements in the neuro and the autonomics and the sensory and the motor, like there's a lot of really interesting things that can happen. And every chiropractor has these stories, even the most, sort of like evidence-based ones where they start helping folks with exercises and all of a sudden their hormones regulate, right? All of a sudden their sleep, like you said. So I think like, again, it's a humble way to approach your patient care. And it's not as a means to, have a solution for every problem. But when you see those things like, the stories you're telling, and I could tell mine too, it just really gives you an appreciation and it's humbling. And in my experience, it really makes me that much more conscientious with my chiropractic care because it's a big deal, right? Yeah. The whole point is that chiropractic is not something to be taken lightly and is not something to just be administered willy-nilly and just to be, a blanket treatment for every little thing. Like if we can help people by caring for their spine thoughtfully, then we have to accept the reality that if we don't do it properly, we could cause them harm, right? And so for me, when I see those circumstances and hear those stories, it's always a gut check of like, are you really doing your best, right? Like, is there areas where you as this person's practitioner, their doctor, their whatever, you can get more out of each interaction, right? Like you can get them closer to the full benefits of chiropractic, whether it's scientific, philosophical, whatever. Like it does put us back in the hot seat a little bit and go, you know what? If it's a big deal and we really think that it matters for people's health, both now and long term, then you better get your shit together and really work hard on it, right? You can't excuse away your lack of results. You can't explain away the things that you don't know to people. Like you really have to, it has to spur you on toward excellence in your patient care because we have such big ideas about what it means for their health. And so I don't want to yuck anybody's yum and beat up on all the like philosophical chiropractors, but I hope that you guys are the ones taking it the most seriously, right? Like you're reading the science on what do we know about what a spinal adjustment actually does, right? What's measurable, what's proven, what's the literature say on this? You're working on your technical psychomotor adjusting skills, right? You're going to seminars to enhance your capabilities of analysis. You're investing in diagnostic tools and procedures and practices that help you, more accurately assess your patients and monitor progress, right? Like you're working on being a better chiropractor because it matters a whole lot. And to us, winging it is a non-negotiable. We can't be winging it because we have such powerful ideas about what it means.
That's such an interesting point that if the chiropractors who believe the most change is possible from an adjustment should be the ones who feel the most weight of responsibility to do the adjustment well. Because if you believe that you're saving lives, if you believe that you are turning someone's power on, then carelessly adjusting someone in a non-specific way means something. Like that's a massive detriment to that person's well-being. So it is an interesting thing to think about, to say like, listen, if you believe that, if you believe that your highest belief, the people that have the highest belief in chiropractic should be the ones that are feel the most responsibility to be excellent with their hands and what they're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, like for the folks that have developed a opinion of chiropractic philosophy without really any personal experience with it, I would encourage those folks to put your ego aside and approach it, right? Like give yourself an open mind, just like you're asking everybody to do with your thing, and just take a look at it, right? And like, if you need recommendations, you don't know where to start, like there are some really low barrier to entry resources that can help you sort of wrap your head around the bigger ideas, right? The major, sort of like tenets. And for those of you that love like, getting into the like discussions of the nitty-gritty details about like, what are these, chiropractic principles mean? And, we're talking about the 33 print, all that stuff, like that's cool. Just make sure that you're up to date with your science, right? Like, let's be well-rounded and let's make sure that we honor chiropractic in all its forms and fashions. And, for folks that have strong opinions, those come from personal experiences, and they also come from, preferences and other beliefs and things. So even these discussions do prompt a lot of emotional volatility and a lot of reactions in folks, because it's a deeply personal thing for a lot of chiropractors, either for or against. And so I understand that wading into these waters is sticking your neck out a little bit. But I would say that, I don't hold anybody to a standard I don't hold myself to, right? So these are things that I do. I've got friends that challenge me on this stuff. In the sort of upper cervical world, we call it slipping and checking. It's making sure that you're dialed in with the most important things, and you're finding the opportunities to improve when you've been slacking off a little bit. So I think in just summary, I love chiropractic philosophy. I think it offers a tremendous amount of value in terms of our view of health and healing and what's possible. It gives us really interesting things to think about and mull over and filter some of these through. But it's not an excuse, to be haphazard in your care. It's not a worldview that patients need to adopt in order to achieve the benefits of chiropractic. And it's not a category of chiropractor that needs to be accelerated beyond any other category of chiropractor, in my opinion. Like it or not, the nature of our profession is now that there are a lot of different ways to practice, and we all have our strengths and our limitations. So if you're a philosophical chiropractor, just be aware of the limitations. Seek, folks with other strengths and help them understand what learn what they know. Let's, sort of grow up and work on this deal together. But I do think there's a lot to offer there. So I would hope that folks wouldn't just take their chiropractic professor's word for it, right? If you went to Bridgeport or, Western States or something, and they gave you about 2 seconds on philosophy and said, BJ Palmer tried to run over his dad and he was a magnetic healer, and chiropractic philosophy is really whack and it's pseudoscience, moving on. Well, let's make sure that we're understanding the full story there. But it's so fun to talk about this stuff, because if I listen to this in 5 years, I'm sure I'll have a different take, right? And 5 years ago, I had a different take. So the nature of philosophy in general, philosophy is a thing outside of chiropractic. There are different branches of philosophy. And if you want to get into all that, the morals and the ethics and the epistemology and all that stuff, philosophy is a good thing to have in our life, right? We have to have challenging thought experiments that make meaning of things, and help us sort through the confusion of potentially chaotic things that we encounter. So in that way, I think chiropractic philosophy is really fun and interesting, but I think I get most bothered by the way that it gets used inappropriately and the way that reflects on the philosophy of chiropractic.
I would say 2 things, and then we'll wrap this up. One is that those of you who are evidence-based, I would challenge you to stop thinking that what you're doing is so evidence-based, or that it has to be. And what I mean by that is that within the medical profession, there's very little that is double-blind, triple-blind. There's a standard that some evidence, not all, but some evidence-based chiropractors hold chiropractic to a standard that no medical profession holds anyone to. And so just because there's no study that says a person can't get adjusted and their allergies improve, or a person can't get adjusted and their bladder stops acting up, doesn't mean that it's not possible. So I would just encourage you to maybe stop holding chiropractic to an unrealistic standard, and stop assuming that everything you do is double-blind tested, because it's not. The thing I would say to more vitalistic and subluxation-based chiropractors that may offend them is going to be stop crapping on pain relief. Have you ever been in pain? It sucks. Have you ever been I've been on my back with a bulging disc, unable to get up, and crawled to the bathroom and had to crawl up on the toilet before. I'm very thankful for chiropractic and its ability to help my back. And so the idea that helping someone get out of pain and helping with mobility and helping them stay mobile throughout the course of their life, even if chiropractic only was musculoskeletal, it has a tremendous benefit into society. And so crapping on chiropractors who do musculoskeletal work and do it well and being like, well, stop making chiropractic just about back pain. It's like, like pain relief is awesome.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it really is.
I mean, the only people that don't think it's awesome are people that aren't in pain. And so I would just encourage subluxation-based and philosophical chiropractors, just stop crapping on people that are helping people get out of pain, because it's important. And so I think
a complement to that, I think, is a lot of vitalistic chiropractors position chiropractic as an alternative to medicine, right? And the promise of chiropractic philosophy is that it is a, quote, separate and distinct profession. I have always taken that to mean I don't need to compare, right? And if we are not wanting people to compare us to medical profession, like, stop doing it. You're doing it for them. You're telling patients to choose chiropractic instead of medical intervention for these things. And did you know that this many surgeries fail? And did you know that this stop doing that? Just talk about chiropractic. And if it's separate and distinct, then emphasize that, right? Let's stop positioning it in juxtaposition to medicine and acting like there's this battle to win, between these competing philosophies, and just enhance the value of chiropractic as its own separate and distinct profession.
I think that for me, the last thing I would say is that how chiropractic has operated, and this is our fault. We're not victims here. How chiropractic has operated over the last, 100 plus years has undermined trust with society, with people, with the medical profession. And I believe so strongly that the reason medical doctors don't refer to chiropractors mostly is because of a lack of trust, and not because they don't believe in what we do. Is they just they don't know what a person's going to get. They don't know that person is going to get good care. They don't know that person's going to be well taken care of. They just don't trust that I can send this person to a chiropractor that they don't know. Because if they do know the chiropractor and they trust the chiropractor, they do refer.
Absolutely.
So when a medical doctor or somebody in the medical profession doesn't refer to a chiropractor, it isn't because of anything other than they just don't know a chiropractor that they can trust. And I think that's our fault. We've done a variety of different things over the years to undermine trust. And I think that needs to change. And I don't even know, that's not a philosophical thing. That's not an evidence-based or a thing. It's just we need to do better so that our brothers and sisters in the medical profession, which they are, we may not like them, but they are brothers and sisters in the medical profession that are also taking care of people, that they say, like, oh yeah, you have that issue, like that's a chiropractic issue. And maybe they only think that 10% of what we do is what we do, but right now it's 0%. And
yeah,
I would love for medical doctors and medical profession to say, have you tried chiropractic first? Like, before you do this, like, why don't you go to the chiropractor? Because they know we do that and we do that well. And that to me would be a next kind of beautiful step within our profession.
Love it. Well, hey, we're just two guys with opinions, so I'm not going to fight you in the comments, but I do kind of want to hear from other people and see how they receive this one. But thanks for having me.
Hey, we're going to wrap this up. Anything you want to say before we go, or are we going to take off? Because I know you have something else to do.
All set. We're good.
Cool, man. I'll talk to you later. Thanks for being on, John.